Thank you. Thank you. I was told this is a really chill event, so I'm also going to be seated just for the sake of it. And just grab your drinks, and if you want to sit, sit. If not, do whatever you want to do. I'm just going to slowly get started. Hi, my name's Josephine. I'm here, hi, I'm here to talk about accessibility in headless systems. And we were just saying accessibility may not be as flashy as programming cool glasses that display your company logo or some fun flashy backpack cover, but what's more important than making the things that we make accessible for everybody and inclusive, right? And so I appreciate that. So yeah, we're gonna get started. This is me. I'm from Germany. It's my first time in Belgrade. I'm really happy to be here. So thank you so much to our friends from Halfstack and from CityJS for making all of this possible. And yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, if you want to chat about any of the things that you see up there, cats also very much appreciate it. Just come by and let's grab a coffee or beer later, and then we can have a chat. Or of course, accessibility. And so what are we going to do in the next 20, 25 minutes? Let's see how fast I'll talk. We're talking about web accessibility and why it's important. We're going to have a look at what a headless CMS is, and we're going to see how the two can kind of complement each other, hopefully. And unfortunately, I don't have the time, at least not in the next 20 minutes, to get to know all of you in person. But maybe, quick show of hands, have you worked with accessibility? Have you implemented anything? Quite a few people. All right, really, really cool. And how about headless? Have you worked with headless systems? Some people. Okay, cool. Yeah, so maybe you know things that I don't. Let's catch up afterwards, right? I'm going to try and share some stuff that is maybe for beginners, but also maybe for if you know something about it already. But if you know otherwise, let me know afterwards. All right, so we'll dive into web accessibility. What does that mean, right? We want to make sure that the tools and the software that we build as software engineers is inclusive and can be used by everybody or as many people as possible, right? And if you're thinking about it kind of from a monetary perspective, there was a report by the World Health Organization. They found that over 15% of the global population experiences some form of disability, and that is 1 billion people. So even if you're looking at this and trying to figure out, is it worth my time and money? Yes, it is, for sure, right? And plus, all of us are getting older, if we like it or not. So it's going to affect us at some point. And we'll see also it benefits people without disabilities, right? So here's a slide that you can see different kinds of disabilities, so physical, auditory, cognitive, all sorts of different disabilities. But you can also see there's situational and temporary limitations in there. And that could be, for example, it's super nice weather out, you go in the sun, and you can't see what's going on your phone because maybe you don't have enough color contrast on the page. Or maybe you are in the subway and you want to watch your favorite content creator, but they didn't enable captions. And so that's awkward, right? You don't want to turn up the volume. And all of these things fall into web accessibility, and they will benefit you and all of your users, right? And if you're curious about different user personas, so we just heard a lot of amazing things in the previous talk about thinking about your user. And if you just want to broaden your idea a little bit of what your user could be, there's this really cool tool. They're called Cards for Humanity. They deal you 2 cards. It's a little bit like a game. And you get a user persona and a characteristic that they have. That can be a disability. It doesn't have to be. And this way you can kind of broaden your horizon and see maybe you haven't thought of them before, right? And so this is definitely something to look out for. All right. So we've talked a little bit about web accessibility. If you weren't convinced before, I hope you are now that this is important and relevant for all of us. And now I really want to reel it in again and like talk a little bit about the world of headless and the world of content management, right? Because maybe if you work in an agency or for a big company, likely you're going to work with other people, and maybe they don't want to go through the code, right? Maybe they need a user interface, and maybe they need to be able to fill this in a non-technical way, right? And that's usually where your content management system comes in. And how does that relate to accessibility? Well, ideally, it's the tool where everything comes together, right? So your designers, your content editors, your marketeers, your developers, this is where everybody comes together. And ideally, the tool that you use for that should enable you instead of putting like stones in your way or hindering you in that journey, right? And so if you're completely new to the world of content management, there's two big families, the monolithics, which is kind of like think old school WordPress, everything under one hood. It comes with a lot of themes, a lot of predefined things, less decisions, might be more appealing if you're just starting out and maybe you're not so technical or you're a really small team. And then we have Headless, which is the more modern approach, if you will, and this is where everything is decoupled. So you have your code, and then you have the way where you put it in, right? You enter your data, and so this is completely decoupled. And I might be a little bit biased because I work for a headless system, and they paid me to come here. But I'm trying to show you how this might help with accessibility, right? So let's have a look. Of course, important question. You might be wondering, I've talked about accessibility, I talked about headless, now is it accessible? Developer answer, it really depends. So unfortunately, neither monolithic systems nor headless systems are inherently accessible, and unfortunately, Storyblock isn't either, not yet, we're working on it. But there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of smoothen your path, if you will, and make accessible content for sure, and make your users' experience a little bit more enjoyable. And so a few of the benefits of headless would be, for example, I mean, this is a lot of fluffy marketing terms, but for you as a developer, what might be important is that you have a lot more freedom. You can work with a technology that you want to, and you can add the tools, you can connect everything through API, and so you are a lot more flexible when it comes to making choices, and you have more control about everything, so there's no additional baggage, if you will. Like if you think dealing with a old school legacy system, maybe you have to know a specific technology to actually make changes there, can be quite painful, and there's a lot of like technical depth that comes with it that you first would have to fix or find workarounds, and that's something that you don't have in a headless system. All right, so I talked a lot, it was a lot of theory, now we're going to have a look at a few things, and just because this is kind of, accessibility concerns all of us, right, and there's a lot of overlap between the different disciplines. But today, we're just going to focus on the things that affect developers. And if you're curious about any of the other ones, come have a chat with me afterwards. And regarding developers, it's always a little bit like the metaphor with the iceberg that we just saw. We're diving further in, right? We can't explore the whole thing. It's just a really big topic. But we're just going to have a look at some of the things that can be changed in or in relation to a headless system, because there's so much more that you could do in your front end, right? All right, let's dive right in. So the first thing I really quickly want to talk about is page titles. And if you just, page title is whatever is shown up here in my browser tab. If you're like me and you have 200 tabs open at all times, really helps orient if you at least see a logo or something, right? And then what you could do, or what it is beneficial for in terms of web accessibility is, if you have a cognitive disability, for example, it really helps orient, it helps screen readers so they don't have to go through the page content. Again, it comes back to respecting your user's time and usability, right? And then what you could do in a headless system is include your unique page title to be updated dynamically, right? So that whatever page I'm on, it shows exactly what that is and not just a generic term. So this is something that you could do, for example. Big topic, semantic HTML. Semantic HTML basically means we're using the HTML elements in the way they were intended, right? Seems pretty straightforward, goes wrong a lot in the wild. We're all using a div and styling it in the way that we wanted to instead of using the correct term, right? And this is really problematic because the screen readers, again, if you're visually impaired, for example, you're using a screen reader, it's going to announce and use these different kind of elements to know where we're going. Is an element supposed to be interactive? All of these things we're missing out if we're just using a div. Plus, we're not getting the inherent like style and functionality, but that's a different problem. And so a screen reader would use some of the HTML elements kind of like landmarks, right? So for example, the navigation, the footer, the main, the headlines, right? And all of these things kind of guide the screen reader, give it context and an outline, and this way you can kind of structure your content. And if you're working with a legacy system, you can't change everything the way you want it to. There's an option to add, they're called ARIA landmarks. So this is an accessibility kind of tool that helps you add these attributes to actually have the correct role, but still, if you can, always go with a native element, right? And so in a headless system, how would you use this? Well, you would want to make sure that your components, especially if you're following an atomic design approach, you would want to make sure that your components actually have meaningful landmarks, right? So just one main, make sure there's really just one H1 headline, and so on. So really make sure also people know what elements they're actually using and where. Right? And you can also, use roles and permissions, make sure people are not allowed to do this stuff that they really shouldn't be doing, because with freedom comes a lot of responsibility, right? So one of the things that I mentioned are part of semantic HTML and the landmarks are the headlines, right? And this is a little bit tricky in the headless context because we want to give our marketeers, for example, a lot of freedom, right? We want them to be able to build pages independently. We don't want them to go to us to create pages. But we need to limit that freedom a little bit to make sure our headline hierarchies don't go completely awry. And if I say headline hierarchies, I mean H1 to H6, and then like not skipping them, using H1 just once to signal the most important content, right? Why is that important? Some people use screen readers, like you see here, and there's a function, so this is the screen reader that's used on Mac, but there's many different ones out there, and you can use the rotor function to go through interactive elements, right? So that could be, for example, announcing all the links, announcing all the headlines, going through the navigation. And if you mess up that structure, like I did in the example, you see I have one H1 and then only H2s. That's messy. That's not going to tell them what's important. And also choose your headlines wisely, else it's going to read out something super random, right? So that's why it's really, really important. And so in a CMS, what does that look like? I'm going to show you two different options to kind of control the madness a little bit. And the first one is to manually control the headline hierarchies. And actually, we're going to move over, or I'm going to show you in the example first. So we have here an example, and if we check really quick, this is an H1, and then here we have an H2. And now I'm just going to go into Storyblok. So this is our visual editor. I have a headline here that I actually can't access because that's my H1. I don't want that to be messed with. I only want one H1. But if I go in here, I have my teaser, and I could change the headline as I wanted to, right? I could make an H3, H4, and it just gets smaller and smaller. Should I do that? No, no, no. Absolutely not. This should be an H2 because it's the second most important content, right? But if we just move over to the code real quick, yep, this is the right one. You see we are adjusting. So this is Storyblok. My content is editable. I have my Storyblok editable. But the important bit is down here. I have my headline, and actually I'm adjusting the element according to the headline level, right? So this changes whenever your user changes this. You can do it like that. More flexibility for the editors, but just choose wisely, right? If you wanted to make sure that this doesn't go completely wild, you could add a description here and kind of communicate with your editors and explain why it's important, what headline level to pick, right? So I could say, choose wisely, and save it, and then we have a little hint here for our users, but again, this is a lot of flexibility I'm not sure we want to give, right? But it's an option. And the other option would be to actually have automatically generated headline hierarchies, right? So that would be our next example, which just died on me. Let's see if we can bring it back. Oh no. Oh no. Let's see if it died. What's happening? Let me just stop that. Let's bring it back. And let's see. Not sure why we can't see it. It's the right URL. Okay, I'm going to show you, because this always happens. I have a slide. So what we see here is that what's happening actually in our example, I have no option in my CMS, right? So I can't actually choose because it's taking the headline level automatically. So I have a little helper function, and then it's going to check, is it the first element on my page or not? If it is, it gets the H1. If it isn't, it gets an H2. And this is the same, we're kind of implementing it the same way. So we're setting the tag according, or we're setting the element according to the tag, right? So this gives you a lot more options, if you will, right? Just go back, yeah. So you just have one H1 for sure, you have more security. It's a little bit less, it's a little bit less flexible for the editors, but in general, you can make sure it definitely works. Now, you might say, okay, but then it looks like in your example, right, with all the H2s, that's not really what you want. This is not gonna give you a proper hierarchy. You're partially right if you say that. But now it would be on you to set up the individual components that then follow, that I then fill in onto my page with the other headlines, right? So I can really make sure I have like a really clean structure. All right, so that was our headline hierarchies. One thing that I always want to bring up, just because it goes wrong so much, is not technically very related to the CMS, but I want to talk about it anyway, is keyboard accessibility, right? So I want to be sure that my users don't only use a mouse or a trackpad, but they can also navigate with the tab key and the arrow keys through my page. And this also translates to assistive technology. It works very similarly. And one thing that you can do for your users, again, usability, to make it more enjoyable, is add a skip link. So if I were to tab, oh, this did not work as well. It's beautiful. Let me start here at the top. Okay, so you see a little, it's very small, but there's a little skip link that lets me skip to the main content. If I press enter, I'm in the main content. I don't have to go through all the content manually. So if I were to try that again, and now if I just tab, I have to go through all the navigation. It's very tedious, especially if I visit a page a lot, right? So adding a skip link will make your user's life a lot easier, and it's not that hard to do. You want to stick to a logical tab order. Again, I can really quickly, let's see if we can run this. So you want to make sure if you're on an English language page, you want to go from left to right, from top to bottom. Make sure that the user flow is kind of similar to what you would also have if you're reading the page. And now you could use a tool like this one. Is called Tab Ally, but basically it visualizes the tab flow and shows where we're going. And for example, here we have a little bit of a messy situation with my cookie notice, and then we go down and we can kind of try and make sure that we're not skipping any of the interactive elements, for example, right? So this is important, and I'm just going to clear it. Also very important that I can see where my focus is, right? So now we have this turquoise outline. You can definitely argue about the color contrast. I'm pretty sure it's not high enough, but it gets worse because if I go to the button, I actually can't really see where I'm going, right? And here it's just completely gone, and now I don't know where my focus is. So make sure there is a focus, don't hide it, and make sure it has enough color contrast, right? So, and a lot of the tab order will benefit from you using semantic HTML. So we're kind of going full circle here. All right, and don't trap your users. Don't bring them anywhere with the keyboard where they can't actually get away, right? That would be very, very unlucky. All right, another thing that goes wrong a lot is alternative text, right? So you want to add an alternative text that provides context for people who either can't see the image or can't see it very well, or maybe have a bad internet connection and the image doesn't load, and so you still want to tell them what's going on in the image, right? That's my cat. Again, if you want to chat about cats, I'm all here for it. No, but in a headless CMS, I could do something like make sure all the alternative texts are requirements, so I can't actually add an image without the alternative text. But again, take it with a grain of salt, because you don't necessarily, or well, not all the images should have an alternative text. If your image is decorative, if it's really purely just decoration, you actually don't need one, and it would be kind of verbose to like explain something in here. And so you could, for example, create different components for decorative images and normal images, I guess, or non-decorative images, and this way really make it clear to your editors again, hey, this is where alternative text is really important, that's why it's a requirement, but maybe in other cases not so much, right? And really educate the team on why it's important. And last but not least, languages also play into accessibility, right? So we could do, of course, something, or there are many different ways to implement languages in a headless system. But one thing that's kind of interesting to point out is that you can not only add languages, different like international languages, but you could also add a simple version of a language, right, to provide context to maybe folks who are neurodivergent again, or have cognitive disabilities, and this way it's going to be a lot easier for them to comprehend that content. And I personally, I don't know about you, but if I have to do my taxes and I have to look something up, this is really handy, and it has saved me a lot of money before just switching to simple English on the, or simple language on the text form for sure. All right, so to wrap it up, we've seen it's not inherently accessible, but there are a few things that we can do to create accessible content for sure, and to make our experience more accessible. It definitely concerns all of us, and seemingly small things, in air quotes, or things that might not even be a lot of effort to you, can make a huge difference for a lot of people. So it's definitely worth getting started, right? And 10% done is definitely better than nothing. If you're curious about diving further into web accessibility, seeing the slides again, anything, you should be able to scan that QR code and get access to it. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out afterwards. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.